Five Nights at Freddy's. It's a name we all recognize now. The series has become an absolute revelation in the gaming circle and has had an insanely large impact. The game is truly inescapable. Quite frankly, you'd have to live under a rock to genuinely know nothing about at least one of these games. It's developed an insanely large fan base, quickly resulting in an immense cult following by many, many games inspired by its impact. But what makes this game so captivating? Well, that doesn't just have one answer. However, the first FNaF is the scariest, the most effective, the most noteworthy, and I'm gonna break down a comprehensive list of why. Why is Five Nights at Freddy's 1 the scariest in the whole series? Before we get into my analysis, I want to make a preface of boundaries for what games I will and will not be discussing and why. I will not be discussing FNaF World. This is just due to the nature of the game. It's simply not a horror game, and it's just an offshoot of the main series. It's not trying to be Five Nights at Freddy's as a game, it just contains the characters of the series, and that's about it. It and other offshoots of the series are just not worth mentioning. I will not be talking about DLCs and special timed events, because these are not standalone games, and for the most part, are not important to the lore. They're usually just for fun. Now, before I start trashing these games, I would also like to mention that I love all of the games, and I love all of the characters. Five Nights at Freddy's as a series has a very, very special place in my heart. Each game has its own unique charm. Please keep in mind, the opinions stated in this video are from a horror standpoint, and a horror standpoint only. This is about gameplay and its effectiveness in being scary, not the value of the game as a storytelling mechanism. So, without further ado, let's get into this. Five Nights at Freddy's 1. Of course, we have to start with the beginning of it all and the reason I'm making this video. The first game. This game was rough around the edges, but honestly, I believe this worked in its favor. Since there's so much to discuss, I'll be breaking this game into 4 sections: character design, simplicity, ambiance, and story. So, what makes this game so effective? Let's start with character design. All of the characters in the game are extremely simple and easily identifiable. They follow the silhouette rule to the T. If you're unaware of what the silhouette rule in character design is, essentially, it's an easy way to identify a good character design. If you completely black out the character and put them next to other characters in the same universe, and you can easily identify each of them without needing to see key details, then it's a good design. When lining up these characters, it's not even a struggle to tell them apart. Even Golden Freddy follows this rule simply due to the erosion of his suit and his posture in comparison to Freddy's. There is no struggle to discern any of the characters from each other. Visually, these character designs are also extremely efficient. Their dirty aesthetic adds to the environment of mistrust and discomfort. Nobody wants to clean them, nobody wants to go near them, and as far as we're aware, they've gone completely untouched by management. Their dark eyes are brilliant, and no, I'm not talking about when they take out their eyes. I'm talking about their eye sockets. These deep, dark rings around their eyes. The rings make a feeling of constant awareness. It looks and feels like they see everything. They're always watching. Their eyes feel like they're always looking at you or looking for you, even outside of their clear goal of trying to get into your office. It feels like they're staring at you, the player, not the night guard. Aside from just obvious details that are unsettling by clear intent, like their eyes, Uncanny Valley is also used to the game's advantage. The shadows on their faces and many of the hallways just makes it feel like there's more, like there's something inside of them, and later we learn this to be dead children. The idea of these characters that you would see as a kid in places like Chuck E. Cheese, which were undoubtedly moderately upsetting even though it was a good place to be at the time, was now being used in a sense of sentiency against the player's psyche. It used something familiar and made it seem foreign. They were more aware than they should have been. They had more programming than they should have ever. Why did they walk off stage? Why was that ever programmed into them? Why were you the threat? The ambiguity of everything added a sense of depth without truly adding much outside of that. There was enough left to the imagination to scare anyone at a surface level because the answer could have truly been almost anything. More specifically, things like, why was Foxy damaged? Why did Freddy take so long to move? Why was Chica the only one in the kitchen and we couldn't see her? Why was Golden Freddy nowhere to be found outside of a rare chance? The entire game is filled with millions of whys, and every answer we get only raises deeper and scarier questions. Simplicity. This is quite possibly the most important part of the games that began to fall off in later renditions. All of the gameplay mechanics are extremely simple. This means that it's an easy game to pick up and allowed extra instructions to be presented in a natural way. The first night, you only need to understand the basics: doors, lights, and camera. On the second night, you understand Foxy's mechanics, adding the complication to the simple instructions that you were given the night before. That's it. Those are the only mechanics. However, things become more complicated. Your power becomes more scarce, animatronics become more active. Freddy adds another denominator to the game. Nothing is changed, it simply compounds. It's not overwhelming until it needs to be. Overall, this game was a simple, vague idea, and used that to its advantage. It was a real concept in a familiar place with unfamiliar circumstances. Ambiance. The ambiance is essential to any horror game. You can't be scared if nothing feels scary. That's common sense. One thing that I want to mention that I almost never hear discussed is the concept of liminality in the games. If you don't know what liminality is, think of things like the Backrooms or Dreamcore. Basically, it's common places that lack major characteristics, like an abandoned mall not having people in it anymore, a store with nothing but shelves, a playground in the dark with no children, or an apartment complex with nothing but a hallway full of doors. Just things that feel wrong on a basic human level. Usually, it feels like you've been there before, but you just can't quite remember it, or it even feels like you've had a dream in that place. It's a place of transition, a place that you were into a place that no longer is. A pizza restaurant similar to Rock-afire or Chuck E. Cheese is a genius idea. The demographic who would be playing this game would have gone there as a kid and therefore has expectations for such a place. Seeing just the cameras even before anything moves or proves a reason to be frightening is already unsettling. Seeing a happy, fun place from the perspective of someone in a bleak office in the middle of the night is uncomfortable. It diverts your typical expectations of such a place. It's not consciously scary, but it adds a sense of discomfort completely separate from the actual problems at hand, like killer robots. Audio is also very essential to the ambiance of these games. Audio cues alluding to something changing are extremely present in this game, but as long as you haven't done extensive research before playing, these audio cues could mean just about anything is wrong. It tells you to pay attention, but you're still left wondering what exactly you need to pay attention to. It's not complicated once you're used to it, but it still adds a helpful mechanic that also adds to the atmosphere. Audio is efficiently used to let you know that you are not alone. After the first night, you almost never get moments of silence that don't mean you're about to die. They're not loud audios, but they're audible enough to be concerning. Chica being in the kitchen, hearing her smack around pots is extremely concerning, especially if you don't know it's her. You don't know what's in there, what they're doing, or why they're in there. You just know something is where it shouldn't be. Even simple things like Foxy's goofy singing and Freddy's deep laugh adds a sense of humanity to otherwise inhumane creatures. Even just these voices and sounds added to the uncanny valley factor change the entire perspective. Outside of audio, visual aesthetics also add a significant amount. Specifically, I want to discuss Easter eggs. And no, I'm not talking about Freddy's nose hog, I'm talking about Golden Freddy and Bonnie. Golden Freddy is extremely terrifying and an unexpected experience. Though it's exciting to run into now if you know what it is, it's terrifying for anyone unaware. To see a poster suddenly change and then something is visibly sitting in your office is horrifying, even without his jump scare. Bonnie's Easter egg is also amazing. To open a camera to only see Bonnie insanely close staring into your soul is a spooky experience. There's no true way to tell what's going to make it happen, there's no algorithm to it, and that's what makes it so effective. Also, it's worth briefly touching on posters and similar Easter eggs. Seeing an environment suddenly shift like Freddy's posters, Foxy's sign change, or even the crying child drawings feels wrong. In an already threatening environment, know that there's something paranormal, something that can't be explained, something you can't protect against, is insanely efficient in adding more spook without a jump scare. Delving outside of Easter egg territory, the phone call in Night 4 is an outstanding example of environmental world building. It gives a more realistic sense of what dying in the in-game universe would truly feel like from the perspective of the guard, not just the player. Something that Scott was not capable of providing in a simple game coding software like Click Studio. It instills a sense of fear, containing many audio cues that you're not guaranteed to run into at the point of receiving this call. Especially Golden Freddy's jump scare at the end. The sudden, loud sound clearly enables a spook in the player, but a wonder of what was that is highly effective to anyone unaware of the Golden Freddy Easter egg. Overall, the ambience of the game, especially in audio form, is extremely effective in the subconscious and conscious unease, making genuine scares out of the game much more intense. Story. You may not like this, but the simplicity of the original storyline was better suited for a horror game than what it is now. I'm sure you've all grown to love the convolutedness of the new storyline. Hell, I love the new storyline. I love dissecting it, I love coming up with theories and hearing other theories to create my own, but that doesn't make it a good horror story. The original Five Nights at Freddy's lore was simple and could be noted in just a handful of bullet points. Sure, there wasn't much to talk about, but it was still scary and it added a sense of mystery. Most of the story was told through casually mentioned references by Phone Guy. A good starting point would be the Bite of 87. The Bite of 87 was an intriguing thought. It provoked a sense of curiosity derived from fear of the incident. Whether or not it matters now, it didn't serve any form of intensive purpose in the first game. It simply wasn't meant to. Mentioning that someone was hurt by one of the animatronics was thought-provoking enough to add a new question of why to the series without being detrimental to the gameplay itself. It was effective storytelling without needing to explain itself in depth. Even the fandom was fooled into thinking it was important without actually knowing anything about it. It was a captivating idea to keep you invested in the game and keep asking more questions. Though in general, there's not a lot to discuss in the first game, it helps environment. Sure, it would be cool to have a completely fleshed out story, but it wouldn't be scary. It would feel too clunky for a game that is otherwise not story-driven. Only having simple plot points like a general time that everything took place, small, unimportant references to events, and simple allusion to paranormal is all that's necessary for a game such as Five Nights at Freddy's, and it does it effectively. Overall, with the compiling factors of the original game, it spawned something in the horror community that we had never seen. Though it wasn't the most complex concept, it didn't need to be. The simplicity and effectiveness of the first game spawned a lot of inspiration among many developers, old and new. It inspired countless games and impacted a majority of the gaming community for the better. It was revolutionary in the gaming space and opened a window for many opportunities even outside of just Scott Cawthon. With all of that out of the way, let's discuss why I think no other games have or will compare to the first. Five Nights at Freddy's 2. I think one of the largest issues that I have with FNaF 2 is character design. And no, it's not because of silhouettes. It boils down to the visual aspects of the characters themselves. They're just not scary. Notably the toy animatronics. Don't get me wrong, purely aesthetically I love the toys, but they're just not working in the favor of horror. I do appreciate that they're not trying to be scary too hard, but they're just so round. I think the primary issue with this aspect is the shapes and colors. They're so bright and fun, and that's just not suited to be scary. Their circular shape feels too friendly. If you aren't an artist, essentially, character designs, and most art in general, is founded on very, very simple shapes. Squares, triangles, and circles. Characters with sharper edges are suited to be more aggressive or more straightforward. Round characters are usually reserved for softer and more friendly roles. They're appealing and comforting. I do understand where Scott was coming from. These are children's animatronics. They're not meant to be scary in the day. I just don't think it's doing many favors other than just being jarring from the other animatronics like the Wizards. I don't want to just rip into the toys though. I do have some good things to say. I love Chica's removable beak. It's extremely unsettling, keeping the uncanny valley aspect from the first game. It's genuinely surprising to see that for the first time. It does add a shock factor to her otherwise friendly-looking design. I also love Mangle's design. Though letting children just tear apart a robot does raise some questions, their heavily exposed endoskeleton and mismatched body parts are also extremely effective in producing an offsetting feeling. I love the unnaturally twisted positions hanging from God knows where. They're horrifying. You don't know where it's coming from or exactly what you're looking at, you just know it's coming for you. Lore is starting to add at the point of FNaF 2, but it's still pretty vague and shrouded in mystery for the most part. Everything's relatively well done, and Scott is clearly getting a grip on being more comfortable with adding mechanics. Really, my only issue with the mechanics is that the power's too forgiving. You really have to try to run out of battery in this game, but I do feel like the music box does its best to try to make up for this, so it's not too big of a deal. Overall, at a first glance, FNaF 2 is still a very effective horror game. It feels overwhelming, but progresses at a manageable pace. It does start to feel too easy at some points once you're used to the game, but that's really only through a reasonable amount of experience. FNaF 2 isn't amazing, but it's fine. It's good enough at what it's trying to be. I thoroughly enjoy that game, and it's my favorite gameplay-wise. I just wouldn't necessarily say it's the scariest. Five Nights at Freddy's 3. I'm sure we all have our own issues with the third game, so let's just kind of try to get the elephant out of the room first. The jump scares. Springtrap's jump scare is just so underwhelming. It's not good. It's not in your face enough. It's too predictable and way too slow. There's nothing scary about it aside from design. The Phantoms have significantly better jump scares. 90% of the time when I feel genuinely scared playing this game, it's because of the Phantoms. However, I don't think this makes up for anything. Why are the things that won't kill you scarier than what is actively trying to kill you? I also have an issue with the texture of the Phantoms. Their models are fine, but the colors and textures on them are just goofy. It doesn't look like mold, it doesn't look like a fire, it looks like a watermelon, and Scott is well aware of this, so I don't feel bad for ripping on it. Why did he let such goofy designs like Chica and Foxy's models pass? There's nothing scary about them. It just looks like the original animatronics got spray painted. I really do love the models of them, but most of the first animatronics textures are just goofy. I don't hate them, but I don't like the colors Scott chose in the slightest. It's just not conveying a message in a visually appealing way like he was trying to accomplish. Outside of the visual realm, I feel like the failure of FNaF 3 mainly relies on its mechanics. There is very minimal threat, and that's not to say it isn't stressful, it is, but if you have Springtrap's movement patterns memorized, then this game becomes insanely easy. It's really just cycling through cameras and clicking play audio. The Phantoms do attempt to balance the game and add a sense of urgency, but if you're able to bounce Springtrap between two rooms, then the game doesn't even serve as a challenge. There's no interesting mechanics, it's just sitting on the camera, block vent, play sound. No variation. It really hurts me to have to go in so deep on this game, because it was my favorite FNaF game when it came out because of the lore, but things really started to get interesting here without getting too deep into sub-characters. The character model for Springtrap was also extremely well done. The actual visuals of the game itself are great aside from the goofy animatronic spray paint, but it's really the mechanics and jump scares that make this game fall so flat for me and just about everyone else in the FNaF community. Five Nights at Freddy's 4. You know what, I honestly don't have all that much bad to say about FNaF 4. The designs are great, though this does kind of start to segue into the designs trying too hard to be scary. For what the basis of the game was, it's effective. I love the shift in mechanics. Having to listen so closely is an extremely nerve-wracking mechanic, and it really does make the jump scares that much better. This game also has a reasonable level of difficulty that can't be overcome by simply memorizing patterns. FNaF 4 is the closest out of all the games to compare to the original. The mini-games also add to the story without feeling too heavy for the load that the game carries. The build-up to the Bite of 83 is also extremely shocking for first-time viewers, and I think it really serves its own sense of horror. I don't have anything too negative to say, like I prefaced with. My only real problems are extremely minor, and I think the lore gets a little too convoluted at this point in the series. It starts to steer away from horror, and it it still hasn't completely fallen apart, so I'm not too upset with it. My only big problem is that Scott alluded to the fact that this game was all just a dream in an interview once this had first come out. It's been retconned since, but that was with the release of Sister Location. I just don't think this was a suitable intended end for a series so seemingly rooted in reality, and to that aspect, I really kind of wish that everything ended up ending at FNaF 3, even though we have gotten some really cool storylines since. Sister Location. Dear God, where do I even start with this game? I think Sister Location single-handedly started the downward spiral of the FNaF series. This is not a horror game. It's a story-driven game with way too many scripted events that do absolutely nothing. This game has zero replayability value, and honestly, I never even finished the game after buying it the day of release. This game serves no purpose but to have a few cheap scares on top of a really minimal gameplay aspect. I don't want to go too much in depth on this since it really could be its own video, so if you'd like a video similar, I would say go watch a Yaz video called I Do Not Like Sister Location, and I'll put a link to it in the description. But I know he made a follow-up video to it, and he does kind of defend Sister Location, but I really, really agree with his points in that video of why Sister Location did flop so hard, and why I personally couldn't find the game playable. Some highlighting points that I would like to make are definitely essential to talk about in this video. One of which is that you need a significant amount of background knowledge to get any sort of fun content in this game. This is the only replayable, non-scripted event of the entire game, Entered Night, which brings back a ton of core mechanics of the first game, and the issue here is that you need to do a lot of specific things in a specific order that no one who hasn't played the game yet will ever be able to get without researching, effectively spoiling the game for its entirety. The lore also begins falling apart in this game. It becomes too complicated and story-driven. Everything is a deep, convoluted sci-fi story about William forcing possessions. We learn too much, and in the process it strips us of that mysterious element that was so important in the first few games. Sure, core characters were given motives. That's great for any villain. But the games weren't supposed to be about a villain. They weren't supposed to be about William Afton. They were supposed to be about spooky animatronics, and this major plot point effectively strips them of any scary qualities and motives that they once had. It's becoming a revenge story, not a horror story. The storyline is way too detailed and way too messy all at once. We lose the confirmation of any information we've had in the past now, and it's become about characters that had no reason to be involved in the first place. We lack essential information and have too much inessential information. There's no mystery anymore. It's just confusing. I did love the idea of false free roam. I was extremely excited for the mechanics, but they just simply don't help. They're used in a very, very linear fashion that almost completely defeats the purpose of having it in the first place. We use it in a total of 2 sections, and those 2 sections we have the same lengthy goal of getting from one side of the room, in essentially a zigzag pattern, to the other side of the room. The worst part about it is that every single time you die on these nights, you lose the entire night, and you have to play it over again. And sure, it's cool the first time, but it really loses that effect after dying more than twice and having to replay such a simple, long segment over and over and over to be refed information and dialogue that you've already received and already had to sit through on numerous occasions at this point. Sister Location was so promising. It's a gorgeous game with amazing character designs and animation, but it falls flat in every other aspect. The only redeeming factor of this game is the visuals. Sister Location completely misses the mark of being a horror game. Like I said, I did a much better video on this that I'll leave linked. Please, please, please watch that if you have interest in hearing more about the failure of Sister Location's gameplay. This is a really brief criticism, and there's a lot more to discuss, good and bad, regarding this game. At this point, Five Nights at Freddy's is a series that strayed way too far from ever being a horror game again, that I don't think it would even be worth me discussing outside of the main parts of the series. Everything is too lore-driven now. The series has become a storytelling device, not a horror game. Security Breach, I believe, is passing the point of return. So, let's talk about it. Where is Five Nights at Freddy's going, and why is it failing? Five Nights at Freddy's as a game series is never going to be a simple horror game again. With the direction Steel Wool Games is going by catering to such a childish audience and putting so little care into making the game playable, FNaF is never going to be a horror game again. Especially with Scott now essentially out of the picture, nothing will ever compare the first 4 games. Now he's focusing more on cinematography and things of that nature, rather than actually developing games after his issues with the community had happened. I guess what I'm trying to say with this video is that nothing is going back to the first game. FNaF started as a passion project driven out of spite. It was simple, effective, and done for the purpose of just making one last game. When the other games began to fail, it was mainly due to 2 aspects: mechanics and lore. Mechanics began teetering between too complicated and too simple at all times. Eventually, this began to be made up for by the lore, and that resulted in killing the scare factor altogether. The fact that these games were no longer scary and instead were now a heavily plot-driven series brought in a large fan base of kids, causing the games to derail further. These highly intensive plot points destroyed the mystery that the initial games were once so shrouded in, destroying the stories along with it. Five Nights at Freddy's, simply for this reason, will never be able to redeem itself from what it once was. Despite the fact that these games are no longer scary, I would like to say that I have absolutely no hate for them, except for Security Breach. The FNaF series was an extremely impactful game to the entirety of the industry and a lot of people's lives, including my own. It became a staple of the horror industry and spawned a massive cult following, inspiring hundreds of games. It was a passion project that came from a very lucky set of circumstances and popularity. Simply put, the Five Nights at Freddy's series is outstanding, but nothing will ever compare to what the first game was. Hey guys, so this part's completely unscripted, but if you watch this far into the video, I just wanted to say thank you. This is completely new for me. I've never even really in-depth thought about starting a YouTube channel outside of just uploading some screen recordings, so I just want to give you a personal thank you. If you want to see more videos like this, I would appreciate a share, or at least just some kind of comment letting me know that you do enjoy this, some kind of interaction, something, so that I know to continue making these videos. It took a lot of time, but I did really, really enjoy this, and it makes me feel amazing to even think that somebody might be listening to this part of the video. So, thank you, and you have a great day or night or whatever it is.